Okay, so thank you for being here, everyone. We're thrilled to have you. I am Dr. Deborah Fripp. I am the Executive Director of Teach the Shoah, and we are thrilled to bring you sharing their stories, liberation and return to life. But this isn't my show, this is Lynne's show, so I'm going to turn it directly over to Lynne. And this is Lynne Feldman, our International Coordinator and Director of Holocaust Scholarship. Lynne?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we will be talking about liberation and return to life. So from the end of the Holocaust into the New World. And to kickstart our evening, we are going to have Emma, who will be telling us the story of Soul. Emma, whenever you're ready.
It's April 1945. We spent the night somewhere outside of Aachen, Germany. I'm with the US Army. I have specific orders from the rest of the army to head towards Weimar. As we're moving, one of my lieutenants yells, "Hey, Sarge, what's that smell?" At this point, I can smell it too. It's this awful stench odor in the air. And as we keep moving inward, the smell is only getting stronger. So I grab my binoculars and I'm looking through them to try to see what's out there. And I can see in the distance something that looks like some sort of prison or a camp, because there's these 3 barbed wire fences, one stacked in front of the other, layered. And there's these watchtowers, but there's nobody up in there. There's nobody there. It's vacant, quiet. I think it might be deserted. So I have my men keep going, and I put the tanks in the front and the Jeeps in the back. We find an entrance where we can plow the tanks right through those gates. And as I'm looking through the binoculars, I see movement. And it looks like they're people coming closer towards us, inching closer, and they're moving so slowly. And I can see they don't look fully human. They're skeleton-like. I can see almost every bone in their body from here. So I tell my men, let's pile out. I've got 3 grenades on my shoulder. I've got a gun in my hand, and I have a knife in my boot. And I'm aiming this gun at these people as they're coming closer. And this one man, he's maybe 5 feet tall and only 60 pounds, gets close enough and asks me, "Seid ihr amerikanische Soldaten?" I don't speak German, but I know Yiddish. So I answer him back in Yiddish. "Jawohl, wir sind amerikanische Soldaten und ich bin ein Yid." Yes, we are American soldiers, and I'm a Jew. He takes his hands and he places them over mine, wrapped around my gun. And he looks me in the eye and he says, "What took you so long?" I fall to the ground. The tears are falling out of my face. I take a minute, compose myself, and I quickly get my men to run back to the vehicles. I tell them, grab any rations that you can find, any food, water, and bring it over. And as they're handing out the water to these people, they're taking it down faster than their bodies can handle. Some of them are retching and falling to the ground, dying. I watch a man try to bite into a chocolate bar, and his teeth just crumble out of his mouth. We made mistakes because we didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea. The man, Yosef, who approached me first, his name was Yosef, and he shows us around the rest of the camps. And as we're walking deeper into the camps, the smell is so awful that we're trying to cover our noses with a jacket, with handkerchief, anything we can find, because we can't seem to find any fresh air. The smell is so bad. And I asked him, you know, what's that chimney over there with the smoke billowing out? I had seen it from my tank earlier. And he looks at me and he tells me, those are the crematoriums. And I look closer and I can see that there's 6 ovens all in a row leading up into that one big chimney. We get closer, and as we're getting closer, I can see to my left and to my right, there are piles of bodies stacked on top of each other, maybe 6 to 8 feet tall, just lifeless, waiting to be cremated. And slightly to the right of the ovens is just this pile of ashes. We head back to our vehicles that night to try to get some rest. My men and I, we haven't talked to each other for hours, not a word, because there are no words for what we've just witnessed. It's too horrible. We can't even look each other in the eye. And as I'm laying there, I can't help but think, what if my mother had never left Lithuania before World War I to come for America? And my father, what if he had never left Egypt after fighting in the First World War for America? I could be one of those people walking around, one of those shells of a person. It could be the pile of ashes. The next day, the rest of the US Army met up with us. General Eisenhower came, but beforehand, he commanded all of the citizens of Weimar to come to this camp that's called Buchenwald. That's where we were. And he ordered them to look around, to see the horrors, to see the atrocities that the Germans did to their people. He gathers us around and he tells us, and he couldn't have been standing more than 5 feet from me. And he looks at us and he says, anybody here with a pen, paper, write this down. Take pictures. Because someday, somewhere, some son of a bitch is going to say, this never happened. But I was there. I can't forget it. I will never forget.
Thank you so much, Emma. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to comment at all, please feel free to use the chat all through this evening. We will be reading it, and our storytellers will be reading your comments as well. But first, before we actually get to the point of Soul's story of liberation, we need to ask ourselves, what led up to this? What happened first? How did we end up here? And we're going to move back to April 1944. The deportation of the Hungarian Jewry begins. This is one of the most organized deportations in Europe. Within 8 weeks, over 400,000 Jews are sent to the camps, mainly to Auschwitz. We know this because this is also the only Jewry that was documented arriving in Auschwitz. 8 different transports photographed and left as evidence in what is later known as the Auschwitz album. The photo that we have in front of us is from the Auschwitz album. Let's move on. Deborah, thank you. So within those 8 weeks that Jews are being deported from Hungary to Auschwitz, other things are happening in the war. The tides are changing. On the 5th of June, 1944, the city of Rome is liberated in Italy. This is the first European capital to be liberated in the war. And the following day, D-Day, the landing in Normandy. So the Germans already know at this point that things are not really working for them anymore. And the war is going to be lost at some point. But yet, as we've just seen, deportations of Jews continue. Killing pits in Eastern Europe, which hasn't been liberated yet, continue. And it begs questions of why and how could this be? But it did happen, and why, we don't have a definite answer. But we do know that the tides are changing. If we could move one slide, please. On the 9th of June, 3 days after D-Day, Hannah Senesh, a parachuter who leaves the Yishuv in Mandatory Palestine. The Yishuv is what we call the Jewish settlement in Israel. Wasn't a state yet at that point, under British rule. Hannah Senesh, together with 37 other people, are sent in to parachute into occupied Europe to gather intel and to try and help out as many fellow Jews as they can. Hannah and 6 other of her comrades are captured. And why am I telling you this now? I mean, how is this related? It's related because it answers one of the questions of what did they know here in Israel? What did they know in Mandatory Palestine? They knew that bad things are happening in Europe. Maybe they don't know the extent of it. Maybe they don't know how many gas chambers there are or how the Jews are dying, but they know that something bad is happening and they want to be part of the war effort. They want to be part of the allies who go to fight the Nazis. So after lots of training, there is a Jewish force that joins the British Army. They're called the Jewish Brigade, and Hannah Senesh and many others take part in this war effort. If we could move slides, please. Time goes on, more and more Jews end up in Auschwitz and in a few other camps, both in Poland and in other areas of the Reich. But there is an attempt to revolt in Auschwitz. On the 7th of October, 1944, the Sonderkommando uprising happens in Auschwitz. Now, this isn't something spontaneous. This was in the planning for over a year. In Auschwitz, we have an underground movement divided into 2 sections. We have the Jewish underground and we have the international underground, which is mainly run by Polish political prisoners, POWs, and gays, Jehovah's Witnesses, and all the other prisoners, the non-Jewish prisoners. And within the Jewish underground, we also have the Sonderkommandos who work in the gas chambers. And there is this need to revolt. There is this need to try and do something. The Sonderkommandos, who are in touch constantly with the Jewish underground in the camp itself, want to get gunpowder. And there is a way to do this. There is a group of women who work in an ammunition factory. I just need to explain for one moment that when we say Auschwitz, we think of the big brown gate with the train tracks going into it. But that is Auschwitz-Birkenau, Auschwitz II. Auschwitz is a general name for 43 camps. There's Auschwitz I, there's Auschwitz II Birkenau, and then there's all these other sub-camps. And some of these sub-camps are actually factories where the inmates would go from the camp, walk a few miles, go into the factory. I want to say work, but it's forced labor. So they work for hours on end and then they come home. And the women worked in an ammunition, not all the women, some women worked in an ammunition factory. And about 20 women also joined the underground in Auschwitz. And after many conversations with the Sonderkommando and the underground, about 20 women volunteer to start smuggling in gunpowder. And this is at great risk to their own lives. And they do this, but it takes months. They start in March, bringing every time a tiny bit of gunpowder in their pockets, in their shoes, wherever they could. And the women pass this on to the Jewish underground, who then pass it on to the Sonderkommando. And on the 7th of October, there was enough gunpowder to blow up Crematorium 2 and to severely damage Crematorium 3. When we say crematorium, it's the same as the gas chambers. They're all in the one building. We know in Auschwitz II, in Birkenau, there were 4 gas chambers and crematoriums, and in Auschwitz I, there was 1. So number 2 and number 3 were blown up. At the same time, the international underground started their uprising as well. And during 12 hours of fighting within the camp, about 20 Nazi soldiers get injured. Some of them end up dead. But the revolt is shut down after 12 hours. But this has a lasting effect because 2 gas chambers are now, uncommissioned. You can't use them. And by the 29th of October, not very long after the uprising, the command to stop the killing in gas in Auschwitz comes down from Himmler in Germany to Auschwitz in Poland. And the killing in gas stops. The gas chambers are closed and then demolished. This is part of the German attempt to erase any kind of evidence. Could we move one slide, please? On the 14th of January, the Red Army is coming closer and closer to Auschwitz. And there is a decision, a high up hierarchy decision, to move anybody, anyone from the prisoners who could still work, who could still contribute something to the war efforts on the German part, of course, to be marched out from Auschwitz into Germany, into factories there. On the 14th of March, 60,000 Jews and others, because there were other prisoners in Auschwitz, are marched out on what is then later called the death marches. In the camp itself, we still have people because we know Auschwitz was liberated. So there were 7,000 people left behind, mainly older people, sick, and children. We need to remember that the deportations from Hungary, we're still carrying on. We still have families arriving in Auschwitz. We still have children arriving there. And I'd like to tell you a very short anecdote about the death marches. There was death marches from all the camps, not just from Auschwitz. The closer the Allies come, the more Jews are being marched out from those camps. And there is a group of 1,000 women who are marched out. And this is one of the longest marches that we know about to date. It's a bit of a ridiculous march. They march for 106 days. And from the 1,000 women, just over 300 remaining alive at the end. The death marches is not part of the killing machine in any way. It is a means to an end, and the means is more working hands that can supply either ammunition or any other needs of either the Wehrmacht, of the Luftwaffe, anything related to the German military. Can we move on? Thank you. On the 27th of January, 1945, Auschwitz is liberated by the Red Army. Now, the Red Army has already liberated camps beforehand. They kind of know what they're going to see. And as Emma told us so beautifully, or horrifically, should I say, I'm not sure, what soldiers saw when they come in to liberate a camp. Most of the time not even knowing that that's what's going to happen, but they end up in a place where there's these people, these shells of people, as Emma described them. But the Red Army already knows that this is what's facing them. And they know that this is something that needs to be documented. This is something that needs to be shown to the world. Only their film crew comes a little bit late. They come 3 days later. So the footage we are going to see now, which is about 1.5 minutes of a silent film taken by the Red Army, is basically reenactment. They've asked the prisoners, the ex-prisoners, now liberated prisoners, to go back into the camp and then walk out again. It wasn't such a difficult thing to do, and we'll talk about this later on this evening, but most of the people who were liberated from the camp didn't go anywhere. They were there anyway. So what we're seeing, even though this is taken 3 days after liberation, it's still authentic. It's still a piece of the history. And I'm just a reminder again, it's a silent film. There's no sound to it. Pardon me. So I know that wasn't very easy to watch, and thank you for bearing witness to this as well. If we could move on. So Auschwitz is liberated, but the war still carries on. And as we saw with the Hungarian Jews, there seems to be this intense need of the Nazis to still deport Jews. And what we see in front of us in this slide is a two photos taken on the 13th of April, 1945, of a liberated train. This train left Bergen-Belsen in Germany with 2,000 Jews in the train. And the train went around Europe for 2 weeks with no real destination. I mean, Auschwitz is already liberated. Most of the camps in Poland are already liberated at this point. So where is this train going? Nobody really knows. Not even the conductor on that train knows where this train is going. And the train is stopped by the American forces. Pardon me. The American forces who actually liberate this train. And just by looking at these photos, this relief that people have because they've been stuck in this train, not knowing what their future would be. And actually not also knowing that some of the camps have been liberated because they came out from Bergen-Belsen, which continued being a camp up until the end of the war. So this is yet another part of the Nazi regime that we can't explain. Why was there this train so late in the war? Where was it going? What was its point? We just don't know. But thank God, those 2,000 people on that train were liberated, were free. But this brings up a lot of questions that will come up later about freedom. We can move to the next slide. Pardon me. So not many weeks after that train was liberated, 8th of May, 1945, V-Day. So we have here pictures from different newspapers from around the world. Churchill was happy. The King of England comes out on the palace waving, and you know, in New York you have big parades, and the world is so happy to be free and liberated, and they won the war. You know, the Allies won the war. This is such a happy day. But what about the Jews? What happened to the Jews? Yes, they were liberated and the war was over. We could go to the next slide. But what actually happens? The Jews are liberated, that is true. But are they free? Do they have somewhere to go? What happens next? Next slide. Some Jews try to go home. They try to go back to either their hometown or at least to the country where they were born. And I'll tell you one story of one certain place where the Jews tried to go back home, and that is in Kielce. Kielce is a very small city. It's not even a city, a village in Poland. And Jews end up in this small city in a building that I'd like to call a hotel, but it really wasn't. It was just a building with rooms for rent. And 80 Jews end up in this building waiting to either go to their own hometown, or maybe they came from Kielce originally. And on the 1st of July, 1946, an 8-year-old boy named Henrik disappears. He's from Kielce and he just disappears. His parents couldn't find him anywhere, and they decide to report him as missing at the police station. 2 days later, Henrik suddenly returns home, and he tells his father that the Jews kidnapped him. And he was in one of those houses in the city, and he managed to escape. So in the morning of the 4th of July, 1946, Henrik and his father decide that they're going to go to the police station and give evidence about what happened to Henrik. And as they're walking towards the police station, they're joined by an acquaintance. And when the three of them, the acquaintance, the father, and Henrik, pass this house on number 7 Palti Street in Kielce, the acquaintance points out to the house and says to Henrik, "Is this where you were? Was this where you were held?" And Henrik says, "Yes, yes, that's where I was." And then they ask the boy, "Could you recognize the person who kidnapped you?" And Henrik points at this man standing outside, a short man wearing a green hat, and he's saying, "That's the man." So Henrik, the father, and the acquaintance go to the police station, and they give this testimony. And as they say this, as they tell this, Kielce is a very, very small village. People start hearing this, and people start talking about the boy who was kidnapped by the Jews. And suddenly it's not just the one boy, there's lots of boys that are being kept in a basement in this building where all the Jews are. And this turns into a modern day blood libel. The story goes that the boys are kept in the cellar to give blood transfusions to random Russian police officers who are around. I mean, they could have just said that they're using the blood for matzah. Same. And when rumors start to travel, people get more and more agitated. And a mob decides that they are going to pound the doors of this building. And they're going to find and save the little non-Jewish children in the basement. And what happens at the end is a pogrom. There are no boys in the basement. Nobody was kidnapped. But 47 Jews are killed in this pogrom. We know of 46 names of the Jews and one who only had a tattooed number. The day after the pogrom, the city council of Kielce decides that this is not something that they can agree to. I mean, it's already happened, but they can't agree to it. And they make all the citizens of Kielce bring to proper burial all 47 people and have a proper tombstone with everybody's name on it. And this is what happened to many Jews who tried to go back to their homes. Kielce is one story, but there's also others. And it brings us back to the question, where do people go? What do they do? They can't go home. They don't have a home anymore. And what happens is a lot of the Jews decide that they will either fight to get their way into the land of Israel or to the New World, America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. But in the meantime, Jews start to go into Germany. Because in Germany, which is now divided into 3 post-war, we have the Soviet part of Germany, and then we have in Western Germany, the American zone and the British zone. And in the American and British zone, we have a new animal called DP camps, displaced people's camps, usually set up within what used to be labor camps or big factory buildings where they could house thousands and thousands of Jews that were pouring back into Germany. These DP camps exist because all the governments of the free world haven't changed their visa policies. The quotas haven't grown. The war didn't change anything. So people are waiting for their visas. And in the meantime, they're trying to return to life. So within the DP camps, we find schools political parties, synagogues, life, and weddings, and children are being born. And Deborah is going to tell us the story of Shoshana and Avram.
Hmm. I'm waiting for the nurse. She's in the storeroom. Oh, no, don't worry. I'm not sick. I'm not sick. I'm getting married. Okay. I work in this hospital. I volunteer here. I have since, well, not exactly since liberation. I mean, when my sister and I were liberated, we weighed less than 60 pounds each. But we recovered. And when I got to the point where I weighed about 80 pounds, I started working in this hospital. It was a good thing to do. And that's where I met Avraham. I heard this patient screaming down the hall, and I went to see if I could help. And that's when I first saw him. He had these beautiful blue eyes and this little blonde forelock. Now, I hadn't been feeling things in response to men yet, but Avraham, he woke something up. When we first met, we shared no languages in common. We couldn't talk to each other, but we found ways to communicate, and we fell in love, and now we're getting married. Now, Avraham's Catholic, and we almost got married in a church. We went into the church and everything, and I saw the priest, and I turned around and walked right back out. I couldn't do it. I could not get married in a church. So Avraham agreed to convert, and now we're getting married here in the DP camp with 6 other couples. We got tickets for wedding clothes, a dress for me, a suit for him, but I really wanted a veil, something to wear on my head. So here I am at the hospital because I came to the nurse and I asked her if she had anything that would serve. You're in luck, she says, coming out of the storeroom. I have just the thing. A square of bandage 3 feet on a side, just big enough to make a veil for you for your wedding. I don't know what I'm going to do. The wedding was beautiful. Married life is wonderful. But this morning, the doctor told me that I'm pregnant. I can't be pregnant. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't be pregnant. Not after Auschwitz, not after what I saw. I mean, I know this is a DP camp. I know it's over. Auschwitz is destroyed. Auschwitz doesn't exist yet, except it still exists in my head. And the memories are too strong and it's too close. And the things I saw, what happened to babies in Auschwitz, pregnant women who came in pregnant, what they had to do. I've seen things that I do not want to talk about. And after those things I've seen, I can't be pregnant. I told the doctor I wanted an abortion. He said he'd only do it if I could pay for it, which I can't. Avraham doesn't know. I don't want Avraham to know. I don't know what I'm going to do. There must be a way to make myself miscarry. I mean, they always say, if you lift heavy objects, don't lift heavy objects when you're pregnant because it'll make you miscarry. So maybe if I lift something really heavy, it'll make me miscarry. Maybe if I take a hot iron, put a wet towel on my belly so I don't burn myself, but take a hot iron and maybe that'll make me miscarry. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just know I have to do something, because after Auschwitz, I cannot be pregnant. None of that worked. I didn't make myself miscarry. And thank God I did not manage to hurt the baby, because my beautiful baby boy was born alive and healthy. He was one of 7 babies born that week in that same place. And I look at him and I think about how I didn't want him. I think about how I tried to kill him. I think about it all the time. And I thank God that I didn't succeed. And I pray God lets me keep him. And I pray God keeps my beautiful baby boy healthy and happy and safe.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And I will share that baby Moshe was alive, grew up, had a family, married the amazing Leah, and this has to be said out loud. Leah is one of the reasons why Teach the Shoah exists today. So thank you for telling their story. So there's a reason why the years right after the war were called the baby boom years, because this is what people did while they were waiting for their permission to go into all sorts of countries. They got married and they restarted their life and created new families. And many, many children were born in these DP camps. But not everybody had the same kind of patience for sitting around and waiting for a certificate. We move to the next slide. Quite a large group of Jews who wanted to come to the land of Israel decided that by hook and by crook, they are going to make their way into the promised land. And an organization, a spontaneous, we should say, organization was created called Habricha, which means the escape in Hebrew. And people crossed Europe in any means possible, by foot, by wagon, by train, making their way into Italy. Why Italy, do you ask? I'll explain. So earlier on, when we talked about Hannah Senesh, we also discussed the Jewish Brigade. The Jewish Brigade was part of the war efforts, and one of the places that they end up in is in Italy. Italy, in the Mediterranean, had this golden opportunity where people could go onto a boat and try and make it into the land of Israel. Illegally, because they're not sitting in the DP camp waiting for the official certificate that will let them in. So people gather around in Italy, and in ways that are kind of miraculous, I would say, they manage to get themselves onto different kinds of boats and travel the seas to the land of Israel. But not everybody manages to enter the promised land. The British soldiers who are patrolling the borders of Israel, they know about these boats coming in and they try to stop them. And some of them manage to smuggle their way in and immediately immersed into the Jewish population here, and they changed their clothes and suddenly they were always here. But the ones who don't manage to smuggle themselves in, they get sent first to a prison in the north of Israel, in Atlit, And when that prison gets too full to have anybody else in there, the British government opens a detention camp in Cyprus, and the Jews are sent there again, into a camp, into barracks with barbed wire. So yes, here they have food and there's no Nazis and no forced labor, but they are stuck in these camps. But that's not the only thing that happens in Italy, not just Tabrica. We can move one slide. The next thing that happens, or should I say simultaneously, what happens is there is a great need for revenge. We find many testimonies from different DP camps, but even before, from all sorts of ghettos and labor camps, we find the will to avenge the death of the Jews, of the brothers and the sisters and the cousins and the parents. And in Italy, Abba Kovner, the young dashing man standing on his own, gazing into the wilderness, Abba Kovner, who was one of the greater partisans of his time, he and 49 other people who were partisans like him, his buddies, get together and they decide that they are not just going to help the Jewish brigade who is there and the Jews who want to be smuggled into the land of Israel. They are going to avenge blood for blood, soul for soul. The plan doesn't really work. The only thing they actually manage to do is to give food poisoning to a camp of German POWs, prisoners of war. And it wasn't the greatest revenge, not the one that they envisioned for sure, but they did manage to give lots of Nazis a good few bad days of stomach aches and cramps. And once all of them come to the land of Israel, that's kind of dissolved and the revenge never happens. If it would have happened, we would have been having a completely different program tonight, I think, but we don't know, and we don't live with the what ifs, only with what actually happened. And what happened was that the Avengers, though they had a very cool name, did not really avenge. Let's move on. No, let's not move on yet. Oh, yes, thank you. No, move on, sorry. And I'm going to jump forward a few years, not many, but a few years post-war. 1948, the state of Israel is declared. But this is a difficult birth of a state, or a rebirth of a state, we should say. After the Declaration of Independence, the war starts. And in this war, we have over 22,000 locally born Jews fighting for the freedom and for the birth of their state. But we also have over 21,000 Holocaust survivors who fight for the land. And among that, we also have 174 last of kin who fall on the defense of their country. The last of kin are people who lost every single member of their family, came to the land of Israel, fought in the war, and died in the war. They are one of the main reasons why I tell stories of the Holocaust, to commemorate them and to commemorate their sacrifice for this land. So that covers about 51% of the people who were in the DP camps, but we still have nearly 50% of people who are in the DP camps and who don't want to come to the land of Israel. They want to go to the New World. They want to go to America. They want to go to Canada, to New Zealand, to Australia. And they stay in these DP camps up until 1951. That's when the last DP camp is closed. Could we move slides? And now Lyla is going to take us into a story of the arrival in the USA, in the New World. Lyla, whenever you're ready.
I'm on a boat, and we're leaving Austria and Europe for good. We've been living in Europe since I was born. We're leaving Austria, and the boat is barely leaving the port, but it feels like we've been on the water forever. I see Austria fading in the distance and the clouds covering it. And I feel part of myself ripped away from my body and put onto the land. Because it can never fully come with me. Part of me will always be in Europe. Part of me will always stay there. And I see myself as I'm looking out, the wind in my hair and the water splashing in my face. I'm looking out and I can see myself out there with my brother standing by me. When I was 8 years old, my brothers were murdered by the Nazis. And they were my best friends. And I still can't believe they're not here with me today. I'm reminded back to all the times, all the terrors and all the horrors. I remember being trapped under the snow, Nazi soldiers riding past me. I can't believe they didn't even stomp on me or find me. And I am so thankful they didn't. After that memory, I'm back in reality. I'm on the boat and I'm a week later on the deck. And I feel just remembering everything that's happened. And suddenly my sister comes. She comes to me crying in tears. She comes and she starts talking about how she doesn't want to go to America, how she doesn't want to leave. We're a week into the trip. I say it's too late to go back and promise her that 1948 will be a great year. She looks up at me with her eyes, her big blue eyes, and she hugs me. And I'm transported in my mind back to the height of the war, back underground. We were starving. We're partisans. So we've been underground and we've been freeing people for weeks, months, years even. Me and my sister are alone underground. And a piece of bread united us. My brother, before he passed away, a year before, handed me a piece of bread. He told me to eat it. I hadn't eaten in 5 days, and my sister hadn't eaten in 3. She was crying on the floor, screaming after my brother had left. I tried to calm her down, and then without a hesitation, I gave her the piece of bread. She took a small bite and then realized what it was and swallowed it whole. And even though my stomach wasn't full of food, it was full with love. And I see that now. And as she starts talking about something different, something about America, I feel fluttered and I look back at her. And somehow, in that exact moment, my parents come. I'm on the boat with my mother and my sister and my father. They come up to us, me and my sister, after all the tears have been dried. My father starts telling me about a house he wants to build in America, a large house with lots of animals like the one we had in Lithuania. And my mother tells me about a doll. The doll, she says, even though it can never replace your old doll you had in Charkeshtina, it could be a new doll. It could represent something new, a new part of your life. I know it can never replace it, but it can be a part of it. And in that moment, I go into a deep sadness. And I think, do I want this new doll? Why do I deserve this new doll when so many other people don't have even their lives, don't have their homes? And then I remember, that's me. This doll would just be a reminder of everything that I lost. She's right, it can never replace the old doll. But it could be the start of something new. She's also right about that. But in this moment, it didn't feel like that. It felt like I'd lost everything. And I think about that for the rest of the trip. And I fall asleep one night and wake up in the morning. I hear people screaming, Baruch Hashem! We're here, we're here! And they're talking about some huge statue, some lady. And I go outside after getting ready, of course. And I see my parents. I run to the edge of the ship. I run to go see what's there, what everyone's talking about. I make my way through the crowd. And my parents following closely behind with my sister. And I see a giant statue, much taller than anything I've ever seen before. And my mother says, that is Lady Liberty. She's welcoming us to America. But I look at her differently than that. I look at her and she's so big and she makes me feel so insignificant, so small, like I'm one Jew out of thousands, millions who aren't here anymore, thousands of millions who didn't get the chance to come to America. I am just one of those. I close my eyes to blink and I see something new in her eyes. I see what my mother was talking about. I see welcoming, I see joy, and I see hope. She tells me I'm home. She tells me that there is hope for the future and that you should try, do your best, even though it will never replace Europe. It will feel like home. That was the story of Rose, Rachel Vega Lifshin, and I'm Lyla, her great-granddaughter.
Lyla, thank you so much. That was beautiful. So Lyla shares with us the story of her great-grandmother, like thousands of other Jews who arrive at Ellis Island, at the New World, where, just like anywhere else, these refugees become an integral part of society, a useful part of society. And as we can see, they all grow their beautiful families and get to have great grandchildren like Lyla. I just want to clarify one thing before we move into the next section. I'm sorry, I misspoke about the last kin. There were only 167 of them, not 174. To my defense, it's 4 o'clock in the morning in Israel. Numbers at this point are very blurry in my head. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you to our storytellers. We are now going to open the floor for any questions, comments, thoughts, or anything you would like to share with us. I will say that there was a question to me personally before in the chat, and I'd like to go back to that if I may. I was asked about the complex of Auschwitz. So we all know from films and from photographs the pictures of the big entrance, big brown entrance with train tracks. This is actually Auschwitz II, Auschwitz-Birkenau. There's a total of 43 camps within the complex of what is called in Polish Auschwitz. It's the name of the nearby village. And the first Auschwitz, Auschwitz I, was actually an army camp from World War I, a Polish army camp, which was then expanded by the Nazis. It was taken over and expanded. And that is where we have the big famous sign of Arbeit macht frei, work liberates, yet another German euphemism. And then Auschwitz II Birkenau is the one with the big train tracks. And Monowitz, which was the third part, also a very large part of the camp. And then there were all these little sub-camps. But for most of the books and films and documentaries that we see, we usually see either the big red buildings, which is Auschwitz I, or we see the wooden barracks from Auschwitz II Birkenau. So I hope that clarified. And any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Lynn. I have a question, actually.
Yes, please.
Which the question about Auschwitz sort of leads to this. You mentioned that 3 days after liberation, most of the people were still there, so they could go reenact the liberation. How long did it take for them to leave?
So there's no number on that. We can't say if it was weeks or months, but we know that a lot of the people who were liberated from Auschwitz make their way into Germany. And that was a long and difficult journey. Some of the train tracks were already bombed by the Allies. So there's a lot of walking and there's a lot of stopping over in small villages. Kielce not being one of them, where the pogrom happened. But it was at length. So they didn't leave within a week. They also, where would they go? At the beginning, there was a lot of confusion and nobody knew what to do. And the Russians were there giving food and giving them, I mean, you can see in that footage, even though it's only 3 days later, but you see people already dressed in like a proper winter coat, and they have like these duffel blankets and whatever. That didn't exist in camp life. This is stuff that the Red Army gives the liberated prisoners, and they stay until they can start moving. A lot of them are very sick and obviously starved. We need to remember the Nazis left, started leaving on the 14th. There's very little personnel that stays behind until the last couple of days. I didn't go into this, but Auschwitz is locked up and left for 2 days on their own. Like the prisoners are there, they don't know what to do. They don't know if the barbed wire still has electricity on it or not. So they don't know if they can leave. And they wait to be liberated. They know there's already all these rumors that the Russians are coming to liberate them. So they end up staying because that's where there's food and where there's shelter. And I don't know how many of you have been in Poland in January, but that's not the kind of weather you want to be walking around in. It goes into the minuses. It's very cold. It's very difficult to walk around and, try to get somewhere, let alone into Germany.
Did they know where they were?
Yes. When we read a lot of what is called the last letters of people who make their way to Auschwitz and leave notes within the cattle carts, they mention the stations that they pass and they can see the signs. And the final station is Auschwitz. So they know they're going to a place called Auschwitz, but what is Auschwitz? Until you don't get there, you don't know what it is. The same for all the other camps.
Right, of course. So Emma has a question. It's a very interesting question. When were reparations, if any, enacted for the victims? So many returned to find their homes occupied or businesses confiscated by non-Jewish Germans. So were they reimbursed at all? Were there reparations? How did that happen?
So the state of Israel in the 1950s were negotiating with West Germany, and under the law of reparations, yes, there still are till today. Reparations are paid out to Holocaust victims. There is a very set and clear directive of what is considered a Holocaust victim to be paid those reparations. For the Jewish communities outside of the land of Israel, from very early 50s, we know of cases of individuals applying for this. The German government would review a case and decide accordingly. I can say from my side of the family, though now in Israel, when they used to live in America, that's how they did their request for reparations. But it is a law in Germany and in the state of Israel that a survivor that comes under the criteria of that law will get whatever.
When was that law enacted?
I'll tell you in a minute.
Don't worry about it.
At 4 in the morning, dates and numbers.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so
10th of September 1952.
So not until 1952. So it's 7 years later.
Yeah.
So all the people who went back and found their homes were gone and their businesses were gone and they didn't get any help.
So the question that we're asking is I think the question is, what kind of help did they get? The help that they got wasn't from the German government at that point. Germany, right after the war, is divided. There is a German government in West Germany, but it's not a proper government yet. It becomes one when the British zone is dissolved. Don't know if you all know this, but there is American presence in Germany up until 1989. So it takes time. The help that the Jews get, mainly in the DP camps, come from either the Joint, the Jewish organization through the US. They get help from the Red Cross. All sorts of Jewish foundations from around the world gets together to donate whatever is needed. And like the story that Deborah told us of Shoshana and Avram. So when they got married, and the other 6 couples at the same time, they get married under a chuppah that was sent from the Joint in Israel, in mandatory Palestine. They ship a chuppah to each DP camp so that people can get married. It's and they, also like they ship a Torah scroll to every one of the DP camps so that you could study Torah. They also send Hebrew teachers so that people can learn Hebrew, and so on and so forth. So the help that comes from within. It's Jews helping Jews. And you also have a lot of charitable organizations, non-Jewish ones. I mean, obviously the Red Cross isn't a Jewish organization, but there are charitable organizations that donate food and blankets and supplies and whatever. But it's not so much a governmental thing. It's charities.
Do they have English teachers too?
In Cyprus, yes. I don't know of any of them in Germany. I know the big thing was to teach Hebrew. And a lot of them kind of know a bit of Yiddish, maybe, if they're old enough, so they remember Yiddish, so they also teach a bit in Yiddish. But
that's interesting, since they were officially not permitted to go to Israel, and there were people who were officially permitted to go to America and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, that they're teaching Hebrew, but they're not teaching English. That's kind of interesting.
It is possible that there were people who taught in English. I haven't heard of any testimonies given about that, but there are many testimonies about Hebrew teachers. And I can't help say Hamora Liora, because we have a teacher here. So yeah, there were schools. They opened schools within the DP camps. There's a very cute sign where it says both in Yiddish and in Polish that there would be a very big football match in one of the DP camps on a Shabbos. So you know that like there's a lot of secular people within the camps and within the DP camps. So that's like a little cute anecdote that they try to have, like they try to return to life. They're using their time in the meantime wisely.
Right. So Ron wanted to ask a question. He wanted to ask it aloud. Ron, go ahead and unmute yourself and
Thank you.
ask your question if you want.
Hi, I mean, it's a comment as much as it's a question. You know, when we do a lot of these sessions, we give appreciations, and I'm not going to get too deep into the woods on that. But while I will say that all the storytellers were good and effective and told their stories well, what I found interesting about Emma's story in particular was that there is a disconnect that the other two didn't have, in which we had Emma, who's clearly a woman, telling the story of a liberating soldier who was a man. And while I thought about that briefly when she started, that disconnect fell away. And I was able to suspend disbelief, and the story worked in that way. I guess because of the delivery, which was very naturalistic. And I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always wonderful when we get appreciations for our storytellers, and those of you who have come to our programs before know that this kind of appreciation, as Ron is demonstrating for us, is an important part of what we do. So that being said, I wanted to give one person in particular, if she's interested, a chance to say something, and that is Lyla's grandmother, Sherry, who is, I believe, Rose's daughter. So Sherry, if you want to say a few words, I'm going to pin you here so people can see you. If you want to say a few words, we'd love to hear that.
Hi, I have to tell you that when Lyla spoke, I felt like my mother was here. Lyla brought my mom back to life and really filled my heart with the way she spoke. It just blows my mind. This whole program is just awesome. All the speakers were phenomenal and really pulled you into their stories and the way they told them. I am just so touched by Lyla. I'm verklempt.
Thank you. So I won't make you be verklempt in front of everybody, but thank you so much for sharing. So let me.
One other thing,
Okay.
my Rose's father, Joseph Lifshin, was one of the directors of ORT in a DB camp in Ebelsburg, to help train people come in to learn different trades so that they be able to work. There's a book that I'm going to share with Lyla where there's pictures of him in this ORT camp in Ebelsburg, and so the next time Lyla shares a story, she can show you pictures as well.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's bring if we don't have any other current questions, though, keep asking questions if you have them, and we will address them. But let's give our storytellers a chance to to say something. And as I'm adding this pin to Lyla, are you ready for? The quick answer, yes, that you will be able to access the recording. Give me about a week and it will be up on the YouTube channel, on the Teach the Shoah YouTube channel, which is YouTube/@Teach the Shoah. I'll put that in the chat in a second. Lyla, talk to us a little bit. You need to unmute.
Oh, what do you guys want to know?
Well, actually, I had a question for you, which was, how old was your great-grandmother at the time when she was on the boat?
She was turning 13, and that's actually the current age I am. So this was sort of cool to be able to tell it like her, my own age.
Yes. Yeah, I that's amusing because I was at a program yesterday where I made a comment that there's nothing quite like hearing the story of a 13-year-old told by a 13-year-old, and you just did that for us. I want to point out to everybody that this week, or plus or minus about a week, is Lila's bat mitzvah. So she's doing this in the middle of her bat mitzvah, and I think there's a number of people here who are involved in that. But Lyla, thank you so much for being willing to do this for us in the middle of all this other stuff that you're doing. And congratulations on your mazel tov on your bat mitzvah.
Thank you. It's been such a honor working with all of you guys. So
The honor is ours.
anyone else have any questions?
Tell us how
Lyla, I have a question for you.
okay.
That
Yes.
was me.
Hi.
Lyla, it was such a pleasure working with you. And do you want to share anything about how you chose the scenes? We were very tight on time, and you had to take a story that you could tell much longer and fit into a short amount of time. Can you share a little bit about how you chose, or why you chose certain scenes to share from her life, from Rosie's life?
I felt certain scenes had a lot of power to the story, just like flashbacks, because no one really knows what she was thinking. So it's sort of hard to put that together in her own thoughts. But the stories that I told about the snow and the red was very powerful to me, because it's a story my grandmother actually shared with me when I was younger, so it means a lot to me, and it's a really big part of my life. So
All right. Well, thank you, Lyla, for joining us and for sharing some of your process with us. Emma, would you like to share some of your process, or Emma, there you are.
Sure, yeah. Well, I had the honor of working with Jennifer back in 2009, and I was paired with 2 other students to interview Saul Goldstein, who had a very unique perspective, literally the other side of the fence, if you will. And he was about 18 to 22, I think, during the war. And he was kind of rose in the ranks and joined the army to spite his parents, actually. And so he shared his story with me through Goucher, and I worked with Jennifer on storytelling techniques ages ago, and I've gotten the opportunity to share his story a couple times. But every time I do, I'm lucky that there have been some recordings of him sharing his own story. And so I can, and plus the interview tapes that I took are archived, and I'll go and watch clips of them once in a while to sort of get into character, if you will. because yes, I am not a soldier. But it just to hear his voice and hear the words that he uses to describe what he witnessed is so powerful. So I was lucky to have gotten to be in person with the man whose story I share. So thank you all for listening.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I don't know if people caught this. Emma said this quickly. He was 21, right? He was 21 at the time, which when we told the story in Israel, the Israelis are less surprised by that. But those of us who come from America, the idea of a 21-year-old being in charge of the troops and witnessing this is kind of amazing.
I think he did end up going to work or enlisting in the IDF. He became very passionate witnessing this, that he would never let a Jewish person witness something so horrific again. And so he spent the rest of his entire adult life either fighting or sharing his story, and setting up organizations for other people. So other Jewish people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really neat. That's really neat. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I guess that leaves me talk a little bit about Shoshana's story. As I said in the chat, Shoshana's story is actually a story that that they play in Yad Vashem. And when I started listening to the testimony, Lynne sent me this testimony. We were looking for DP camp testimony. And I thought, I've heard this story before. And then I realized that it was the Roshkovsky story. And like I said, this was the mother-in-law of my teacher. So telling her story. And when I was in Israel in early January, and we met with her, we had dinner with her and her husband, who is the baby in the story, which is kind of mind-blowing. And so they were able to give me some additional context and some additional information that filled out the story beyond what's in the testimony that they play at Yad Vashem. And actually 2 nights ago or I guess last night, was it last night in Israel? Last night when we did this in Israel, she and her husband were in the audience, and that was a really amazing experience to be able to tell this story to them. A little scary, I have to say, but an amazing experience. So other questions, thoughts, Lynne, other things you want to say?
Oh, Jennifer has a question.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Lynne. So Lynne is our historian and scholar. And so working with Deborah and Lynne, weaving in the history and the storytelling side, which is my role, I wanted to ask Lynne, what has it been like for her these past few months, year or so, to weave the scholarship and storytelling into that, both how you do it so beautifully, as you told us stories within your lecture, but also having other storytellers and weaving them into your lecture. Like, what has that experience been like from a historian's perspective?
So it's amazing, because it's amazing for a few reasons. There is a lot to be said about giving a talk and then using recorded testimony of a survivor. And that has a lot of added value. But there is something very personable about having somebody tell you the story here and now, lending their voice to these stories. It also opens the opportunity to tell stories of people who didn't survive. Which wasn't our case this evening, but last night for the Israel program, we had Shifra telling us a story of a last kin, and those didn't survive. So giving a voice to that, I think it's a privilege. it's a mitzvah in a way, I think. But in the historical point of view, when you tell dry history, it's very difficult to get through to your audience, because not many people are interested in sitting here and hearing the numbers and the dates and the facts, because it's dry. But when we tell it together with a personal story, those numbers and names and places, they have a face, they have a sound, and they have this personal connection. So for me, it's the same to give a historical talk like today, or to guide in Poland, or to guide at Yad Vashem, or to guide anywhere. It's the same thing. I would do the same thing, only if I'm guiding, I'm on my own and I can't have amazing storytellers with me. But when I give a talk on Zoom, I can have somebody in Singapore and somebody in the US and somebody in Israel. And you know, these voices come across, and everybody, of course, as you all say, you yourself, Jennifer and Deborah, part of what we do when we do the storytelling is not just the story of the survivor, but also where that meets us and where we come into that. And the way that we tell is part of who we are. Even though we're loyal to the words that the testimony gives us, we still bring a part of ourselves into it. So that makes it even more personable and even more relatable. And in today's world, we need to make history a bit more approachable, especially when we're dealing with something so delicate, so fragile, so painful, like the Holocaust. I hope that kind of answered what you asked. I'm not sure. I went on to a run.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I'm going to honor everybody's time here. We're about out of time, so I'm going to bring the slides back up for our last slide. Just give you a little bit of contact information if you want any of it. You can take it down. Keep an eye on your email for programs coming up. We have storytelling workshops in February and March. We haven't announced those yet, but we will be soon. And then more programs of this nature will be coming in April for Yom HaShoah. So again, thank you to everybody for coming, and we appreciate your time. And thank you to Lynn for a really wonderful program.
Thank you so much.